All right, you YouTube viewers. As you can see, this is the tank I showed you once before. It was totally taken over with algae, and I was feeding the fish tiny amounts of food. So if you go read the experts, and they'll tell you need CO2 and all that. Other people telling you you don't need CO2. A lot of these guys, when they dirt a tank, they have the plants full size and they stick them in there. They shoot the video, and then have an update. You can still tell that the sword plant, if you look to the right hand side, there's Amazon swords. The sword like leaves will disintegrate, and you get these long, like spider plant leaves, a little bit wider. That's submersed leaves. And you'll notice when they're faking the video, those leaves will be like a sword, like a real Amazon sword, uh, from its natural uh, habitat. Here under reduced lighting, this is a Necrew light from years ago I bought. I was one of the first people to buy a Necrew light and go online and tell people they're pretty good. And what you see is the Amazon sword. In the foreground, you'll see a bunch of Sagittarius. That is taken off. I had 5 plants. Now I think I have 25 or 30 plants. That's doing good. Off to the left-hand side, you'll see some new Hygrophila polysperma. It's not supposed to be that. It's supposed to be with an R, Rosetta, whatever, after Hydrophilia, Hygrophila polysperma, Rogalia, whatever that's supposed to be. Um, it's eBay plants. Now, when I introduced some plants, I immediately got blue-green algae. I had the regular algae and black algae. Now, the snails, bladder snails. I dropped them in. Let's say I dropped 40 of them in, and they totally went. They just started eating. They ate the algae from everywhere, even on the sand. Remember? I don't know if you remember the last one. You can see the sand was covered with blue-green algae in one spot and algae in another. And I don't see any. I don't see any snail poop. The little specks I do see are snails, and at some point I'm going to have to start plucking them out. But remember, I had a tank that was totally taken away or taken over by algae, and I've gone through that route. See, when I was younger, I didn't have live plants, and whenever I get to the 1 year mark on the tank, from I was probably overfeeding the fish. I have to take the tank totally down, clean it, gravel, put it all back together. Then a friend of my father's gave me some plants, and he gave me Hygrophila polysperma. He gave me some Sagittarius, and he gave me some water sprite. And it ended up all I had left working was the water sprite that was floating on the top of the aquarium. I got these little tiny plants out of it, and when the plant would get too big, I would take it out of the aquarium and leave the smaller ones. And that's the live plants that I had. Then I went back into it in the like 1984. I went back into tropical fish. I got the lights. I can't think of them. The Vita lights. I started using Vita lights, and they were better than the Growlux, but not much better. I could grow. I'm going to forget the name of the plants. They use very low light. Um, oh, it's past. I can't remember. But in other words, the overwhelming thing that kept happening was I kept getting uh, algae blooms, and I was probably overfeeding the fish. But you get algae, and there's all these chemicals you can put in the tank, and there's big stores. Well, I always, whenever I got a snail, I immediately caught it, got it out of the tank. And I remember that friend of my father's. He had a tank that looked similar to this, and it was actually grown in more. And his sand, the bottom was white, and I'm like, I could never get that. That's because he had snails. I told you when I made a comment about all the snails he started breaking them and feeding them to the fish. And he goes, I don't buy fish food. He says, I feed them they were guppies, they were plain guppies. He says, I break the snails and let them eat the snails. He had an ecosystem going there. He had probably was a 50-gallon tank, and it sat up high in the cellar, and he had a fluorescent light fixture above it with They weren't Vitalites, Growlux. So my father had asked him at work. He worked with my dad, and he said to my father, "Get him a Growlux light." So my father got me a hooded light for my tank, stainless steel, and with a Growlux. But every 6 months you got to change that bulb. Now I had the same Growlux bulb in that thing for 10 years, and after a while it didn't put out enough light for the water sprite, and they started dying off. But yeah, so now as I'm older, I'm going to go back into a hobby that beat the crap out of me. I admit it. I got the algae problem. So this time I kept saying, what am I doing wrong? Now, like I said, you can go down the path of adding a CO2 unit to it, and there's these chemicals you can put in the water. It's supposed to be liquid CO2, and that's supposed to, well, anyway, I went with the snails. And I think the package was 50 snails on eBay, and I only took out the 40 of the biggest ones and dropped them in. The rest I threw out. And in there was some, I don't know if you can see them in the frame. Yeah, there's a couple ram horn uh, uh, snails. They were tiny when they were in there. Now, we're talking 40 days. Those snails went from tiny little dots to, I won't say 3/4 of an inch. Let's just say they're about 3/4 of an inch. Now, between the bladder snails and the ram horn, they've eaten blue-green algae, black algae, brown algae, and green algae. All the algae in this tank, even that was on the sand, they sat on the sand like they're doing now. They sit there and they clean every granule of sand. They get the algae off it. Oh, and the other thing I want to tell you is the plants. You notice there's no algae on the plants. They go up and down. The bladder snails go up and down each plant. They're even on the Hygrophila polysperma, which is multi-level leaves. They go up and they go on each leaf and they clean it. And when the leaves stay clean, the photosynthesis is really good for the plant, and the plant takes off. Now I'm looking at my sword plants, Amazon swords, and I still have some leaves that are the old ones because they were grown out of the water. And when you put the out of the water grown plants in, they lose the leaves. Now the Hygrophila was grown in 100% humidity. That's the ad. But he sent me different type of Hygrophila. It's not the better stuff. You got to watch what you get from eBay. And the mystery plant they gave me is Hygrophila polysperma ceylon or ceylon, whatever. It grows. It seems to be not. It just seems to be sitting there. It seems to be okay. And on it is a snail going up and down cleaning the leaves. So my opinion is if you get inundated with algae, and go with the snails. And it took them, what are we at? We're at the 50th day, and they got every speck of algae in the tank removed, and 4 different kinds of algae. And I don't know which I can't tell you which snail ate what kind. I know the little tiny bladder snails, they love the green. They go up and down on your plants, but something ate the black, the blue-green, and the brown algae. The brown algae could have been black algae, but black algae I noticed turns into hair algae on the plants. So all the problems I had in the past are not there. Now someone will say, well, you got a hell of a lot of snails. Not really. I mean, I could probably spend an hour with my tweezers picking them up. Maybe I could do it quicker, do it a little time. I notice a certain time of the day, the snails come up and they lay along the water's edge. And you can go along with a paper towel and catch them that way and then throw them out. I don't know if you're into maybe freezing them to kill them that way. And I feel bad for them because they've done their job and now their reward is, I throw them out. But in other words, that was my solution to get further than I've ever gotten further in this hobby before. Now, right now you'll say, well, gee, you didn't plant the plants I planted them as a test. I didn't carry it away because I couldn't count on any of them making it. but the Sagittarius is all up and down the plant. Like I said, I have 5, and there might be even 35 plants if I count them all. That's doing good. And then the Amazon swords have totally adapted. I see one article, you have to take them out and separate them to get more and put them back in. Because the one I bought, I was able to separate it to 2 plants, and it's doing well. And then there's another type of, it might be Thailand. I can't think of the country, but it's a sword, but it's from another country, and it still has leaves. When I first put it in there, it had some leaves that were a little bit brown, and they're slowly dying off. But I didn't want to touch it because you mess up the roots, because the roots were in sand originally, and if I touched anything, I was afraid it would come back up. But the sand actually holds the plants really good if you got a few roots on it. But this is all a test. I wanted to get further than the last time. I didn't want to go with I know I have enough light. I have it on 8 hours a day, and that's what I'm working on. I know a lot of these guys, they do these videos, and I can spot the leaves on the sword plants that they haven't been grown underwater. And here's an update on you cheated. And it's very hard once algae takes over a tank. Now, I hope I can see I hope you can see my past videos to see how bad the algae was on the sand. This is play sand. It's Sacrete play sand, and I'm using those vitamin tablets that are empty with the Ostomacal. I think it's I can't think of the name of the stupid company. Anyway, I'm using that system, and I put the tablets in 1.5 inches over from where the plant's going to go. I don't want to burn the plant, so I put it about 1.5 inches away. Hopefully the plant sends out its runners and it finds it. Now I know the Sagittarius has hit the tablets, and that's where it's growing the best. So I have to, any bare spots now on the bottom floor, which is over to the left, I'll add some of those tablets in the sand, knowing the plants will seek it out and grow and put some more plants. Sagittarius sends runners underneath. We'll call them runners. I think they're rhizomes. No, maybe they're runners. The rhizome's a little bit different. But anyway, yeah, I went and got the Hygrophila polysperma. So I have 2 of the plants that guy gave me, and I have more light than I had in those days. I'm fertilizing. Now he had so many fish in that tank that the fertilization was coming from the fish, and he also had gravel, and that allows the poop to go down through the gravel. This is sand, so nothing from the fish penetrates through the sand enough to feed the plants. So that's why I'm using those tablets that I make myself. I think that's it. I just wanted to show you, I did make a comeback on this tank. I don't have to take it down. But that was my problem. Even though this time I fed the guppies only a little tiny amount of food, it caused an algae problem. And some of it can be my tap water's got some type of minerals in it. But if you put the right snails in there, bladder snails, don't get the Nerites. They go up and down due to glass. They don't go up and down due to plants. You got to get the algae off the plant leaves, or the plant will slowly slow down the growth. The new leaves will start coming out. The old ones will die off. That's what happens when you don't have correct photosynthesis. There's that word, I'm trying to say it. But I just want to tell you, the snails are not that bad of a thing, but you're going to have to do some maintenance to take the extra ones out. And there's a couple different methods. I have a pair of tweezers, a long pair of tweezers, and I can pick the smaller ones out, or maybe the bigger ones and let the smaller ones go through their life cycle. It's up to you. But I want to tell you, the snails will solve that problem. I know there's people out there that are getting overtaken by algae, and you start reading, and it's like use CO2. That tank's got to be taken down. When you buy plants, the plants are going to have different algae on them. The bladder snails keep all that in check. I used to put my hands down in the tank and massage the the leaves to get the algae off. I used to do, the one time I was really into it, and I was going backwards. And the other thing too is guppies don't eat their babies unless you don't feed them enough. Now, in this case, I'm not feeding them, I'm feeding them enough for them to have good health, but I'm not feeding them enough to mess the water parameters up. Well, if you go a little more food than when I'm feeding them, they won't eat the babies. So after a while, there should be enough hiding spots that some of the baby guppies will survive. Not so yet. I used to have these floating, look like Christmas tree branches. Years ago, they sold these things. They had a wooden float on each end, and you would float them in a tank. And when the guppies had the babies, they'd hide up in there. And my father had two friends that had tropical fish, Jimmy James and Elmer Anthony. Elmer Anthony was on the next block, and he grew wagtail platies, red, deep, really red wagtail platies, and the black part of their back tail was jet black. There was no, he grew them and he sold them to local pet shops. And he would give me the ones that were slightly off. And I'd go up there. My father would come home from work. He says, Elmer's got more fish for you. And he'd give me all these fish that he didn't want. And I'd come home and put them in a 10-gallon. And a 10-gallon was too small. And then, being a kid, you're feeding them. You're changing some of the water. Back in those days, too, the guy at the pet shop, the guy that said he was an expert, he told you never want to change the water in a fish tank. The aged water is the best. It's not really true. You've got to take some of the water out after a while. And I told you once before, if you use gravel in a fish tank, after about a year and a half, if you overfeed, that tank's got to be taken down. That gravel gets this fuzzy stuff in it, and your pH will start going off. You won't be able to control the pH. The fish will start dying for no reason. And you created a problem. Even though you make water changes, the fuzz on the gravel is algae and other kinds of plants and that messes the water parameters up. Probably causes a lot of ammonia. See, I don't have enough guppies in here to really cause an ammonia problem, and I also don't have enough guppies to give me enough CO2. But I pick plants that can live almost anywhere. Right? Now I did read about the hygrophila polysperma. One person's getting holes in there, so I'm keeping an eye on it. I put them in, hoping they wouldn't keep coming out of the sand. So far, they're doing good. I'll swing over there. I don't know if it stays in focus. Let me check. Yeah, and that's a test. That's a test setup there. And at some point, I might start moving plants around and go from right to left and do a setup of the plants themselves. But I'm just happy to keep them alive and to get further than the last time. And that's what I do in any of my hobbies. I go back through them and I say, let me try to get past the crashing point. Now, I was in the crashing point 50 days ago. Tank was totally filled with algae. It was getting on the plants. I was starting to lose. And I knew once the algae gets on the plants, they don't grow as fast. You don't get runners. Well, now, if you look at, I think this right here, right there, I'm in the frame. If you look real carefully, you can see the bladder snails. They go up and down the plants, up and down the plants. Every plant has a couple of bladder snails on it. They hang up underneath. They did an incredible job. I think that's it. All right, that's it.